Hey everybody, surprise, Milton Davis here. Hey, about a couple of weeks ago I said I was going to do a reading because I hadn't done one in a while. And since it's a dreary day today and stuck inside and doesn't have anything much to do, I decided today would be that day. Um, I'm going to read a story from my collection, Muscadine Wine. Some of you have already bought the book and purchased it and hopefully read it and enjoyed it. And some of you are still sitting on the fence, but hey, that is what it is. The story I'm going to read today is for the fisher folks out there. Everybody who likes to go fishing. Back in the day, I was a big fisherman. Used to go fishing all the time. When I was in high school, I'd get off the bus after school, grab my fishing tackle, and head straight to the lake, do some fishing and stuff. So this story here is kind of based on a tall tale me and my cousins used to tell each other when we was go fishing. Something we would do, and it would embellish and get bigger and bigger every time we told it. So I thought it'd make a good foundation for my story. So uh, here I am with the big one. Come on, boy, we're going fishing. Uncle Frank patted Cecil's head as he walked across the front porch to the screen door. Cecil jumped to his feet, following his uncle as he swayed into the kitchen. Mama was hovering over the stove, scooping the last bit of grits out of the old pot, while Daddy sat at the dinette reading the Columbus Ledger. Mama turned and looked at her wayward brother. Daddy folded the newspaper just enough to see him. "What you doing here so early, Frankie?" Mama asked. "Going fishing," Frankie replied. Taking Cecil with me, if you let me." Uncle Frankie pulled out a chair from the dinette and almost fell trying to sit. Daddy folded his paper and set it down. "You been drinking?" he asked. "No, man," Uncle Frank replied. "Just a little unstable this morning. You know how it is when you get my age. I think it's a sinus condition." "Since when did they start calling Jack Daniels a sinus condition?" Daddy asked. Mama sat a cup of coffee in front of Uncle Frank. "Just in case your sinuses get worse," she said. "I appreciate you, Jeanette," said Uncle Frank. Cecil laughed as he peered through the screen door. Uncle Frank was always doing something funny. Mama didn't think he was funny, but Daddy would sit around with him, laughing until he cried. Uncle Frank looked at him and winked. "You got any bait?" he asked. "No, sir," Cecil said. "That's all right," Uncle Frank said. "We'll get some on the way." "Where y'all going? Mount Vernon? Eagle Phoenix Mill?" "Nope, we're going to Church Lake." Daddy sucked his teeth. "Ain't no fish in that lake." "What you mean is that you can't catch no fish in that lake," Uncle Frank replied. "You just ain't holding your mouth right." "How long y'all gonna be?" Mama asked. "Now you know I don't come back till I caught something." "They'll be back next week," Daddy said. "Go to hell, Sam," Uncle Frank said. Cecil covered his mouth as he laughed. "Don't be cussing around the boy," Mama said. "Excuse me, young man," Uncle Frank said with a wink. Cecil winked back. He'd heard Uncle Frank say a lot worse when he lost a fish. Uncle Frank finished his coffee, then stood. "Well, we better get going. Them fish ain't bored. Them fish getting bored waiting for us." Mama came to Cecil, firmly clasping his cheeks between her warm hands. Cecil tried to pull away, but Mama's grip was Mama's grip. She kissed his forehead. "You have fun, baby." "Yes, ma'am," he replied as he wiped his forehead. "You know that boy's too old for you to be kissing him," Uncle Frank said. "You mind your business, Frankie. I'll be smacking that forehead as long as I'm alive." Uncle Frank shook his head. "Come on, boy. Let's go catch some fish." Cecil followed Uncle Frank to his 55 Chevy pickup. The boy opened the door, and a pile of potato chips bags was on the passenger side. Cecil swept them onto the floor. He climbed in and slammed the door just like Uncle Frank taught him. After 3 tries, the truck rumbled to life, and they were on their way. Uncle Frank drove to Jackson's bait shop, an old building near Mr. Jackson's main building, Jay's Junkyard. Tiffany Jackson, Mr. Jackson's sister, was behind the counter sipping an RC Cola while humming with the Al Green song playing on the radio. Uncle Frank took off his Braves cap and patted his hair before opened the screen door. "Hey, Tiffy." Miss Tiffany turned and a wide smile came to her face. "Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. Where you been, man? Tiffany came from behind the counter, gave Uncle Frank a hug, then straight up kissed him. Ugh, Cecil said as he covered his eyes. Uncle Frank and Tiffany laughed. Hey, little man, Tiffany said. You going out fishing with your uncle again? Yes, ma'am. Why are you asking him that? Uncle Frank said. You jinxing me. You don't need no jinx, Tiffany said. You're always fishing in the wrong hole. Uncle Frank got a strange look on his face and chuckled. Tiffany winked at him. What y'all talking about? Cecil asked. Grown folks talk, Miss Tiffany said. She ambled to the counter and opened Tom's food container. She took out a cookie and gave it to Cecil. For you, she said. She turned to Uncle Frank. Now what you want? 2 boxes of Wigglers, 1 box of night crawlers. No minnows? Uncle Frank shook his head. No, they don't like minnows where we going. Y'all must be going to Church Lake. Yes, ma'am. Miss Tiffany shook her head as she went to the back of the store. Some folks just don't know how to give up. I had it once, and I'll have it again, Uncle Frank said. Tiffany came back with 4 boxes. The white boxes had Wigglers, the brown boxes the night crawlers. Keep them night crawlers cool, Miss Tiffany said. They don't like the heat. You tell them that every time we come here, Uncle Frank said. Man, give me my $5 and get out my store, Miss Tiffany said. Uncle Frank reached into his right pocket and took out 4 crumpled dollars. He reached into his left pocket and took out 4 quarters. Miss Tiffany bagged the worms, then put 2 cans of soda in the bags as well. On the house, she said. Uncle Frank leaned over the counter and kissed Miss Tiffany on the cheek. You so sweet. Just remember to call me this week, she said. I will. Bye, Miss Tiffany, Cecil said as they walked out the bait shop. Bye, little man. Don't catch 'em all. Cecil grinned. I won't. They set out on the way to Church Lake. Uncle Frank opened Cecil's soda for him. What do you think about Miss Tiffany, Cecil? Cecil looked confused. I don't know. She's an old lady. Uncle Frank laughed. Don't let her hear you say that. Besides, she ain't old. She's younger than your mama. Mama's old too, Cecil said. You better not let your mama hear you say that unless you want a whooping. Uncle Frank took a long pull from his soda. Now, when we get to the lake, I'm going to set you up at the brim hole. You remember how to take them off the hook, right? Yes, sir. Good. I'm going out in the boat. Cecil frowned. Why can't I go out on the boat? 1, you don't know how to swim. 2, you don't have a life jacket. 3, because I said so. But I can't catch bass at the brim hole, Cecil fussed. No, you can't, Uncle Frank replied. You ain't ready for the big league. You need a little bit of more practice. But you'll be ready next year. Then old Uncle Frank will show you how to hook 'em and reel 'em in. Like you reeled in old Hoss? Uncle Frank's frowned and Cecil giggled. Oh, so you flip Wilson now, Uncle Frank said. Well, let me tell you something. Today is old Hoss's last day breathing water. I got this new lure from Tom Mans down in Eufaula that's going to hypnotize her like a cobra to a flute. Cecil didn't know what any of that meant, but if Uncle Frank believed it, then he would try to believe it too. It was still morning when they reached Church Lake. A 1-lane dirt road snaked a half a mile from Macon Road to it. It was actually a pond, a 1-acre man-made lake that once belonged to a farmer who owned the surrounding land. The locals called it Church Lake because it rested at the bottom of the hill where Big Bethel AME Church stood. The lake officially belonged to the church, but the members didn't mind folks indulging in its bounty. Most came to catch brim, shell crackers, and catfish, but Uncle Frank and a few others came for the bass. The road was rough and muddy from a recent rain. Cecil and Uncle Joe jostled about as they rolled over the ruts in the dirt road. They reached the corner of the lake where the brim congregated, and Uncle Frank stopped the truck. Cecil pushed his door wide and jumped out. Slow down, boy, Uncle Frank said. Them fish ain't going nowhere. Cecil ignored his uncle, running until he reached the trunk of the pine tree that had fallen into the lake 2 years ago. Its submerged canopy created the perfect cover for minnows and the perfect refuge for brim. Cecil opened a box of Wigglers, digging into the mulch and pulling out a worm. He baited his hook and casted it just beyond the submerged branches, hoping he wouldn't get snagged. He sat on the trunk, resting his chin on his hands, and waited. I'm going to be out in the boat, Uncle Frank called out. Okay, Cecil shouted, his eyes focused on the red and white barber suspending his bait hook just above the limbs where the brim hid. He heard a splash, then looked up to see Uncle Frank sailing into the old John boat that no one claimed but everyone used when they wanted to fish in the deep water near the lake dam. He watched Uncle Frank paddle out to the deep end. That's where the big fish lived. Cecil heard a smaller plop. He looked for his barber and it was gone. He grabbed his pole and snatched hard, setting the hook. His rod bent and the tip danced back and forth. I got one, he shouted. I got one. Better reel it in before it gets tangled in them branches, Uncle Frank shouted back. Cecil cranked his Zepco 33 reel as fast as his small hands could manage, but the brim on the end of his line wasn't budging. It held his plates for a full minute before slowly coming closer and closer to the bank. Cecil watched the fish zigzag, using its wide body to resist. Cecil kept the pressure on until the brim gave up, laying on its side as he dragged it to the bank. Cecil was careful how he gripped the struggling fish, making sure his hands said he had it firmly before taking out the hook. After dropping the brim into his fish basket, he washed his hands with the lake water, drying them on his jeans. He was just about to get another wiggler from the bait box when he heard Uncle Frank holler, "Woo-wee! Here we go!" Uncle Frank was on his knees in his John boat, turning the handle of his spinning reel as fast as he could. His rod bowed, the spool singing as 15-pound test line was stripped from the reel. "It's old hoss?" Cecil shouted. "Yes, sir," Uncle Frank shouted back. Uncle Frank reeled and reeled, but old Hoss didn't budge. "Come on up here, Miss Hoss," he said. "You know you tired." As if on cue, Uncle Frank's line fell slack. "God damn it! She broke the line." Uncle Frank slammed his rod and reel on the bottom of the John boat. He was in the middle of a cussing fit when his line jerked. His eyes lit up and he snatched the tackle off the bottom of the boat and began reeling again. "Oh, you trying to be slick," he said, swimming to the boat and trying to get me all tangled up. "That ain't happening." Old Hoss was fast, but Uncle Frank was faster. He took up all the slack line and was putting the pressure on the fish again. "I got you now," he said. "I know I got you." Uncle Frank's line went tight and snapped with a sound like a broken guitar. His rod straightened and Uncle Frank stood froze, staring into the water. "She gone?" Cecil asked. Uncle Frank glared at Cecil. He opened his mouth to answer, but something butted the boat. What the hell? A fin rose from under the water behind Uncle Frank. It was huge, bigger than the shark fins Cecil had seen on National Geographic. But it wasn't a shark fin. It resembled a bass dorsal fin, a huge spiked fin. The fin streaked toward the John boat. "Uncle Frank, look out!" Uncle Frank looked puzzled until he saw that big fin coming at him like a torpedo. "Oh, hell no!" The huge fish rammed the John boat. Uncle Frank pitched back, falling into the lake as the boat flipped on top of him. Cecil ran back and forth, helpless. "Uncle Frank! Uncle Frank!" he yelled. Uncle Frank's head broke from the water surface, his eyes wide with fear. He swam for the bank, his thick arms fled in the water. Cecil watched him come closer, then saw the fin appear behind his uncle. "Swim faster, Uncle Frank, faster!" Uncle Frank's eyes narrowed, his arms moving faster, his legs kicking behind him. The fin disappeared, replaced by the head and open mouth of the largest bass Cecil had seen in his life. "Uncle Frank!" The fish mouth hovered over Uncle Frank for a second, then smashed against the surface. Uncle Frank disappeared in an explosion of water. Cecil fell back in shock. The water settled, small ripples undulating to the shore. Cecil stared where he last saw Uncle Frank, then scanned the entire lake, refusing to accept what he'd just seen. "Uncle Frank? Uncle Frank!" The water roared, becoming more and more violent until a massive fish tail thrashed the surface. The churning water changed from clear to red. Moments later, Uncle Frank's head broke to the surface. He gasped and swam hard until he reached the bank. Cecil rushed to help him, but his uncle was on the grass spitting up breakfast and lake water before Cecil could reach him. Uncle Frank rolled onto his back, breathing hard. Cecil looked out on the lake and saw the giant fish body floating on the surface, reddish water spreading around it. Cecil looked back to Uncle Frank and saw the knife in his right hand. Uncle Frank sat up and turned around. A smile came to his face. "I guess that new lure worked," he said. Cecil laughed and Uncle Frank joined him. "Come on, Let's get the hell out of here, he said. Uncle Frank stood and Cecil ran up to him and hugged him. I thought you were dead. Uncle Frank rubbed Cecil's head. I thought so too. Never thought I'd see the inside of a bass. Don't think I want to again. Uncle Frank and Cecil ambled to the truck. It's going to stay between you and me, okay? Cecil nodded. Okay. Uncle Frank opened the passenger door and helped Cecil inside. He trotted over to the driver's side, jumped inside, started the old truck, and sped away. Cecil looked back at Church Lake as Church Lake faded away. He didn't know everything, but he was certain of one thing. He was never going fishing again. And that's it, y'all. That was the big one. It's one of a few stories in Muscadine Wine. All these stories are loosely based on my personal experience growing up in Columbus, Georgia, and living in Georgia, Southwest Georgia, East Georgia, and everywhere else. I hope y'all get a chance to pick up the book, to read the book, and hopefully enjoy the book. So y'all enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Peace.